Welcome to our first off the record podcast. And in this podcast, we're interviewing the opening class for RPOC 2025, Chris Hoyer. I do have to say that to find him to do this class was a little bit a of a chore. We had to find several instructors who knew who he was, knew something about his incidents, and knew something about his class. And then we hit gold. We hit pay dirt. We were able to get him, I'm so glad that he's the opener for Harbaugh because I think his class brings a lot of insights and just a lot of knowledge that would help the common reserve or officer out there on the street responding to critical incidents, primarily uh, post incident and what happens to a person um, afterwards when responding to something that probably not the norm. So before I get into anything else, I want to ask Chris just a few questions, such as Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, let's see. Almost born at Woodstock, August 1969. So,
Oh,
luckily, my mom was pregnant with me. Otherwise, I'd have, probably been born there. But luckily, it didn't happen that way. So, um, moved from New Hampshire. Born on the East Coast of New Hampshire. Moved from there to Virginia, and then from there to Arizona, where I did all my 20 years with Phoenix PD. 20 years and 64 days, as a matter of fact. So.
wow.
Had to quits in 2018 and then moved to San Diego about a year later. Been here ever since. So.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that about yourself. Tell us a little bit more on what brought you to this juncture in developing your class.
Well, it started with an unfortunate incident. A buddy of mine was killed in an ambush. Garden variety, daily radio call, no big deal. We get out there. I was the first one there. Long story short, basically, we made the decision we're going to go ahead and just lock it down, surround and call out, bring him to our battleground. And unfortunately, he had a will to kill and to die. As soon as we started to disembark our vehicles, he opened fire, killed my buddy, almost killed me. And that day changed the entire trajectory of my life. And from that experience grew me going back to the academy to start with and speaking to the younger generation of guys coming on board, which now morphed into now I travel the country and share my story in hopes of saving as many lives as I can. So,
Wow, that's a pretty impressive opening and story, and I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways that our members can have just for listening to your story. Um, so in this class, first responders wellness and surviving critical incidents, what are some of the benefits of attending your class?
benefits are mostly awareness, being aware of like what you're going to experience. Now, on the mental side, playing the what if game. On the physical side, how you set up your gear. On the emotional side, how you deal with loss and trauma, all these kinds of things. And I throw some spirituality in there too, not to shove it down people's throats, but there's been things that I've seen that you just flat out can't explain. There's just no way. And what I say now is when I should be dead and I'm still here, I got to take that on board. And, God and Dave Glass and the buddy that was killed, they're the ones that basically saved my life that day. So,
You know what's interesting in past RPOCs, has not the same class as yours, but people involved with these type of critical incidents, and they all say the same thing is that at some point they found their spiritual guidance after these types of incidents. Uh,
yeah.
how did you? Yeah, tell us more about that.
Well, it was actually a very interesting conversation. I was having with a former boss of mine, really good guy. We're down at the academy one day. This is after I retired, and we're not talking about anything related to the scene or anything else. This was about 2 years later, and out of the blue, he just chimes in and goes, "Hey, do you think after Dave was shot that he stood up and said nobody else is going to get taken except for me?" And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, "Wow, yeah, you know what?" Because this whole time I was kind of believing that only God can stop the bullets. And I've had arguments on the other side going, that's the only way it could possibly be. And I'm not going to lie. My argument to that is I'm like, you know what? It's my gunfight. Let me remember how I want to,
Yeah.
And I truly believe that Dave stood up and said, okay, nobody else is going to be taken except for me. And then fast forward, I got to tell you this really quick story. So my at the time editor, now girlfriend, who did all the background stuff in my book and the editing and everything else, did a phenomenal job. Before we got kind of hot and heavy and fell in love, moved to California together, I took her down to the scene. I said, I really want you to see physically what this looks like so you can have an idea of what we experienced that day and some tiny little level. And so we're walking around down at the scene, and it's really, really windy that day, particularly, where we were. And for whatever reason, there's all the stuff blowing all around us, dust bunnies and, leaves and everything else. And I took her to the spot where David fell, and I said, this is exactly what happened right here. And about 6 rose petals flew in out of nowhere, landed right on his spot, and never moved. I'm like, there's just no way you can deny that. Right there. That's Dave saying, hey, man, I'm good. Cool, thanks. So that's how I look at that. So,
all right. Yeah, and carry that. That's a beautiful image.
Thanks. Oh, I do. Trust me, that's and I see that kind of stuff. We see it all the time now, and I'm like, you know what? That's it's one of little Dave's winks going, hey, man, we're watching you. So.
Yeah, it's a little bit. You get a little bit of that, and all of a sudden you start seeing it in different places. It's interesting how that happens. Hey, Chris, after attending your session, and I'm signing up right now. I'm going to be there. What are some of the tangible things that a reserve can take away and actually put into action in their next shift when they go out, hit the street?
They can. What I start off with is, like I said, the mental preparation.
Mm-hmm.
My number one thing for that is playing that what if game, and a little bit of background on me. So I got hired on 97, graduated 98. I got my first officer involved shooting in 99. And I had role played every possible scenario except for the one that actually happened, of course. And so what I explain is I'm starting at this 0 line. If I don't have any of this information whatsoever, I'm going to be way over here behind the curve. But if I can start from 0 line and be at like number 9 ahead of the curve, when the big one hits, I'm already right where I need to be. So playing that what if game is a good start. And then the tactical side, the physical preparation, how does that look? So I use the example of when I got my shoelace caught on my gas pedal for the first time and got locked in the car and couldn't get out. And that freaked me out, of course. And I'm like, okay, so now I tuck my laces in my boots, right? Little stuff like this. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before David was killed, I took a piece of Velcro and sewed it to my vest where my mag pouches were for my rifle. So when I had to go do that mag exchange, I flipped it up and it stuck, and I was able to get that magazine out of my vest quicker. That's another one of those things. The emotional side, that's where the kind of heavy stuff kind of comes in, and I start talking about critical incident stress management and seeking help on your own and all these kinds of things that people can accept the fact that, I don't care how tough you are, and please, yes, be the toughest guy in the room. I mean, I love it. Yeah, absolutely, all day long. We're cops. We're badass. I love it. That's great. But guess what? In 4.5 seconds, Dave is killed. I got to put 22 rifle rounds in this bad guy, and he misses my head by centimeters to the point I can actually see and feel the rounds going past my head. I don't care how tough you are. That's going to screw you up. And it did. And I talk about why it screwed me up and how I navigated through that and now living the best life I ever had and made the decision to actually go back into the law enforcement community as a retiree. So, yeah, some of those things that's a start, if you will. So.
Well, yeah, and this is all very early in your career, so you carried on through your career, and now you've continued to pursue this course of livelihood and education for police officers, throughout the country. Fantastic! Hats off to you.
Yeah, thanks. I remind people too that I'm a regular guy. I just happen to survive some crazy incidents. I mean, that's all it was. Second OIS, my second year, my first rifle OIS in my 15th year, and my career-ending rifle gunfight in my 18th year. And I was just one of those guys that even with 18 and 20 years on, I'm still out there facing bad guys. That's what you guys hired me to do. I love it.
Yeah.
Why would I give that up? It's just unfortunate that I got involved with so much crazy shit. So.
Basically. Well, you went there. I mean, you got there's a name for guys like you, right?
What name would that be?
I don't know where you want to go with this, Tom. This is our first interview.
From one standpoint, I call it the El Chito Magneto. Let's go with
There
that.
you go.
Hey, listen, I just want to just jump in just for a second. You know, when I'm listening to your story and I'm listening to Jeff's comments, you know, there's a word that's missing in your title of your class, and that is, and I know it's we kind of used it loosely, but resilience.
Yeah.
I mean, I am looking at you, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. You couldn't tell that you've been through those type of critical incidents in your career. You just look well grounded. You look like you're ready to help a fellow cop with lessons learned.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thanks.
I go right there with you, but I'd also be willing to bet there isn't a lot that could get this guy upset. I mean, it's once you've been there. I used to work for a guy who was a door gunner in a helicopter in Vietnam.
Wow.
And he literally rolled his car on the freeway on the way to work one day and hired a taxi and kept going to work. There was nothing. You could not upset this man. He'd been there, done that. There was absolutely nothing in the world that was going to get him upset.
You know, I've overcome a lot of stuff these last few years, especially after Dave. And you know, I kind of credit myself with the proper training. And my agency, they trained us very, very well. And they took care of me very, very well up until close to the end of my career when things kind of started to fall apart. A lot of it was based on my own mistakes that I made. The unfortunate thing was on my 20th anniversary, my best friend, they sent his dog into a deployment and he never came out. So he was killed on my 20th anniversary. And that sent me right back down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And that set off a whole bunch of brand new triggers, which I got a whole section on triggers. I got a whole section on resiliency as well that I talk about with, you know, how you get to that point to be resilient, but also how you maintain that resiliency as well. And when you're faced with, you know, 3 OISs and then a gunfight, not to mention I buried 17 of my buddies in the line of duty, and then your 20th anniversary, your best friend loses his dog, all this shit's going on. You're like, oh my God, how can I survive all this, you know? And then you meet the love of your life who's in the next room over. You write a book, you move to San Diego, and then life it gets amazingly good. I mean, not to say that it's going to happen that way for everybody. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had some major struggles, and we'll talk about that up in the class when I come up there.
Yeah.
So
Good. I'm glad you're going to go there. I mean, I know it's got to be, to a degree, it's got to be painful for you every time you teach this class because you're mentally having to go back into that space. But I think it's tremendously important for the audience, the students in the class, to actually hear the details and understand the depth and the pain that comes with it.
Well, it's a shocker. I mean, it is. I'm not going to lie. There's some stuff in there that's going to make people uncomfortable, but that's maybe going to save your life. And now I say that several times. Please learn it here before you learn it on the street, because all the stuff that I learned, you know, when I end up unfortunately having to kill my first bad guy, it's like, what do you mean? I got to give this guy CPR? They didn't talk about that in the brochure. I mean, clearly you know this, but you don't really know it until it happens. Yeah, but if I can interject a few little things into this, where like I play the audio from the day of, and what I want people to take away from that is, like, if you've never heard it in real life, here. If you have, it's a good reminder that this stuff actually does happen. People do try to kill us, unfortunately, and that's my entire purpose of making sure that people go home every day. That's it. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You know, and you kind of went there a little bit on the last question, but something I always kind of try to reflect on is, are there any recommendations you have for an officer mentally preparing beforehand, right? I mean, we're all, you know, you kind of put on your armor, you put on your uniform. There's a mental shift that occurs, you know, when you're getting ready to basically face the circumstance where you could end up in one of these critical incidents. You know, what's the locker room side of it that helps you prepare before you actually get there?
That's the golden question. Everybody's built a little bit differently. I knew that at some point in time it was probably going to happen to me. I didn't realize it was going to be times 4. And these are just shootings. It doesn't include car accidents and the dead kids and all the other shit that we see on a regular basis. One thing, especially with cops, and we all know this, that's so difficult for us, is to allow ourselves to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And if you say, you know what, every once in a while, I got to just take off the armor and include my family, because our generation, probably you guys, same as me, were taught, don't share this with your family. They don't need to know. Well, that's a bunch of
That's
shit.
true.
They need to know. You know, there's no way I walk in the door and my wife doesn't know what kind of day I had by the look on my face. And when I come home and I'm like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, no, you're not. No, I'm good. No, don't worry. You know, pound on my chest like we do. Um, let down those barriers. Let yourself be vulnerable and talk and say, hey, you know what? I don't care how tough you are. You pull a dead baby out of a pool, that's going to affect you.
Mm.
Start thinking about these things that could happen. Not that you're going to overwhelm yourself with the possibility of, oh my God, the what ifs on that side of the fence, but just think about, hey, in reality, if that does happen, how am I going to respond to this in realistic purposes? You know, and then allow yourself to explore those thoughts and processes. And then the most important thing is start seeking that help. You know, hey, you know, something happened to me and I need somebody to talk to. And the popular theory is that people are going to they're going to judge you and you may lose your position or whatever else. No, it doesn't happen that way. If you bottle that stuff up, this is how guys end up becoming alcoholics, divorced. You know, and I talk about the suicide thing a little bit here, but you don't want to go down that path. And it's a matter of time. You're going to see the bad stuff because people don't call cops when it's time for barbecues and ball games. They call it bad shit. I mean,
You're showing up at the worst time in their life, not the best time. No, it's interesting. Your answer, you went a slightly different place than I was thinking. In my head, I was thinking, I asked the question kind of in the locker room forward, and your answer really said, no. It ain't the locker room. It's the lifestyle. It's you've got to live it. You've got to prepare. You've got to, when you wake up early in bed and you're staring at the ceiling, right? And you have those quiet moments where you can just kind of be yourself and be alone with your thoughts to think through some of these scenarios. Or, in the evening after everyone's gone to bed, take that time as part of life to prepare for these incidents. That's really interesting. You took me to a whole different place.
Thanks. Appreciate it. For guys with your level of experience as well, it's humbling to hear other guys, take on what I say as a new challenge, which is fantastic. But I also remind people, it's like, look, I mean, my opening statement basically is, you guys are in a very highly, I don't want to say lucky, but there's very few people that can do what we do. So you should be patting yourself on the back that you got the ability to do it, and the courageousness that it takes to wear the badge every day, to leave your family to go protect somebody else's family, that's huge. And so pat yourselves on the back. And also, I mean, it sounds maybe a little outside the lines here. It's a ball. I had a blast when I was out there chasing bad guys. I did. I never forgot that. Wait a second. I mean, when they asked me early on when I got hired on, why do you want to be a cop? I'm like, I want to drive as fast as I want, chase bad guys, and carry a gun. I mean, who can say that, right? I mean,
those aren't the winning answers these days.
Well, it wasn't either. I got school. They're like, all right, hey, nope, it's time out. Let's get this right. Okay, I want to make this place, safer for my daughter and whatever. I want to chase bad guys, and that's what I did. It took a toll on me, of course, as it does. But I never stopped having fun. And I think a lot of guys forget. It's like, man, you're highly privileged to be able to wear that badge, just to you got all your fingers and toes, and being able to put that uniform on every day is a huge thing. So,
yeah. Hey, I got a quick question for you. Sorry, Jeff, if I cut in.
You're on. Go.
Because you took my mind in a different direction. In California, as you know, we've got different size departments from, the big guys on the block that have over 10,000 cops in an agency, to an agency that's somewhere in Central Valley that may have 2 patrol guys and a sergeant working, and still yet they come across the same type of crimes. It's just a matter of fractions of a second when one of those guys in the small to medium to large agencies can go through what you've been through in your career, at least one incident, right? So my question to you is, knowing what you know now, going through what you've gone through, and being resilient as you are, a young Chris who just started in the career,
You broke up in the beginning.
What would you tell, knowing what you know now, what would you tell the young Chris entering into the program?
Question.
Yeah. Get all the training you can, and don't forget the most important thing. Number one, take care of yourself, whatever that is. I've got a slide. You guys will see it. When I talk about I talk about the thin blue line, and I've got like 4 different versions of that thin blue line. The very first one talks about, when you're about 5 to 6 years into it, and you're so obsessed with this job, when you're going through the McDonald's drive-through, and she asks you, "Does that complete your order?" and your answer is yes, 10-4. You need to take a step back. I mean, don't get me wrong. And people, they get all wigged out. They're like, "No, man, I gotta stay sharp. I gotta stay on it." Dude, you're not gonna forget how to be a cop. Go take some time for yourself. Go sailing. Go skydiving. Go play guitar. Whatever it is. Take a step away from this career from time to time and reset yourself. Because if you don't, you'll end up like I did, and with your 18th year going, "Oh my God, I completely fell apart. I lost the last 2 years of my career because I was arrogant and stupid and didn't take care of myself." And that was the number one thing I needed to do that I failed to do.
So as we end this interview, I just want to mention this to you. That was a very powerful interview that you just enlightened Jeff and I with, and I'll tell you how. Your story just became my story.
Thanks.
Meaning, whatever you were saying, Jeff and I are nodding, but we're not nodding because we heard you or we acknowledge it. We can recall some stuff in our careers where it's a similar environment.
Yeah.
And just that comment alone, just a simple reminder of it's okay to be human, and it's okay to take a break and then
100%.
jump back into the game.
And you guys have lived it, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So
yeah. So Jeff, if there's anything else you want to say, I want to again say thanks to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Chris. I mean, we're working hard to give you the biggest audience we possibly can. We want this message to get out. I will definitely be in your class, and we're going to shake hands. So it'll be a pleasure to meet you in person. I've truly enjoyed sitting here talking with you, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, it's my honor. Absolutely my honor. I'll bring a bunch of books with me too, by the way, if you guys want copies of my book.
Fantastic. Yeah.
In fact, if we wanted to get this offline, I can get them up to you guys even sooner. And when you guys are talking about how you're nodding, I've had multiple people tell me, they're like, "Did you write that story about me?" I'm like, "No, what do you mean?" That sounds like that's exactly what happened to me. So it's, and I'm not trying to plug the book, but the reason I wrote it was for me, selfishly, 100% for me. And as it turns out, it's now turning into like a self-guidance thing for all law enforcement. The young guys getting on, and the guys like us that are retired and going, where did that 20 or 25 years go, right? So
Yep.
But, awesome. Yeah, so again, I just want to say thank you to you, and I'm so glad that you're on another path in your life, and CRPOA, we want to help you get there. So this is the beginning of a new friendship, and I know you're just going to enjoy yourself at our conference.
Can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.